Welcome back everyone. Today is part 4 of our Framelock folder series. And if you haven't seen parts 1, 2, and 3, please go back and check them out. That way you kind of understand where we're at right now. So in the last video, we adjusted our stop pin track so that it would be right in the open and closed position. So in the closed position, it wouldn't hit our backspacer, and in the open position, it was right where it needs to be in the frame. And on the frames, we cut our bearing pocket and our pivot head pocket. We also went ahead and cut our lock bar. Now, before we release the lock bar, the next step is to come in here and relieve the lock bar down to about 45 thousandths. That way the spring will function properly. It won't be too strong, yet it'll be strong enough to do its job. So I'm gonna use a 5/16 ball end mill, it's carbide, and I'll come in here and cut this pocket about a 1/2 inch wide. Got it set up in the mill, let's get to it. All right, we got the lock bar relieved, but there's something I want to tell you about that happened a while ago. I was working on the rest of the scales, and I broke my 5/16 ball end mill. Now, the way that happened is the head on my mill moved. I mean, this is probably the sorriest mill you can have to do this kind of stuff. It's a round column mill. It's basically a glorified drill press, so it's barely considered a mill. I was setting up the camera for the next shot. I had made an adjustment on the mill and forgot to lock the head. So when I started milling, I got down to about 80 thousandths of my target, and the mill grabbed and twisted the head and destroyed that scale. So this is what it looks like now. I'll still finish it out, but this is going to be my knife. Now I know a lot of you is going to say, well, if I had a milling machine, I could do it too. But I made a whole lot of them without a mill. Like I said, I went over several things and several tools, several methods to do that, including cutting this pocket with a rotary tool, like a Dremel and a drum sander. You can do it. It's not the prettiest thing, but you can make it look pretty good. While I'm waiting on a new end mill to come in, I'm gonna go ahead and cut and make my pocket clips. These will be cut out, profiled, put in the mill vise, and cut down with an end mill. So that's a step I'm going to take right now until my new end mill comes in. So that little screw up cost me several $100. These are custom ordered knives. So when I lose one, I lose that money plus the time, plus the material, and a broke end mill. With our backspacers profiled, drilled, counterbored, and we tapped our frames, now it's time to cut them out where they'll flex when we mount them to the frame. And I'm going to cut that down to about 50 thousandths. I'll leave it thick on the end where it screws to the frame, and there'll be a little lip here that'll be contoured where it goes in the pocket. This will all be softened where it doesn't snag your pocket. So I've got a jig set up here, and I've got a 1/2 inch mill, and it looks sketchy, but I've got a 256 screw that's long, goes way into this bar of 3/8 steel, and we're going to cut it in. I've got to take out about 114 thousandths, something like that, to get down to that 45 to 50 thousandths range. Now, you don't have to make a pocket clip. You can buy these things and modify them yourself. In other words, drill the holes and mount them to your frame. But I like to make them. They're lightweight and they work great. They look good on the already titanium frame. All right, got our pocket clips all done. Everything's done except a little sanding when I go do the final assembly, but turned out pretty good. Now, when these are mounted onto the handle, there's about a 30 thousandths gap in between the bottom of the clip and the frame. That allows it to go into the pocket a little easier. And there's a ramp there that's ground on, and it's all softened and polished. Makes it real soft and no hard spots anywhere. It's chamfered all the way around. Now, my new 5/16 ball end mill came in the mail, and I was able to finish all of the relieving on the frames. So the next step before we actually cut and release the lock bar is I want to come in here and do some softening on the inside before it's springy. I want to get all this done. I'll actually do some softening back here. If you notice, I've got a mark there. I've got a mark against the backspacer and one a little above. I don't want to go any further than the one above because it'll cause a gap in here. Got a mark down here. I'm going to soften up from here to there. That way when you open it and closing it, you don't cut yourself. You just want to soften it up real good. I don't want to do anything where the backspacer is going to be. So after I do that, then we'll release the lock. We talk about a couple things. When I mill the clips, I just use this jig. It's nothing fancy. I got a 256 screw here tapped, and then it's clamped over here. Also, something else to mention, I use just a piece of plate with a threaded hole there, 256, or depending on whatever screws you're using. I've got one for 172 and all 82. And I just keep these in the trays with the screws. But I can put a screw in here, cut it, and then go grind it flush for the length I want. Real simple stuff. Now, just something to mention on the pocket clips. Like I said, you can buy those pre-made and you just drill them to fit your blade. You could grind them with a 1/2-inch wheel before you profile them. 1/2-inch wheel on your 2x72, just grind them in. It's tough, I know. Same way with your frames, cutting this relief in there. You can do that on your 1/2-inch wheel. Better yet, a Dremel. That's how I cut them, is with a Dremel before I had a mill. All right, so let's go get these frames softened up and we'll get set up to release the lock bar. All right, with our frames all softened up, now I'll do a little more sanding later on before I do final assembly, but got that out of the way because once I cut this lock bar, it's going to be springy, and I don't want that to happen while I'm trying to do those edge softening. So right now I've got a frame set up in here, and we're going to go ahead and release the lock bar. And I just got a parallel bar sitting up here where I can see my line, where I can get it level. And this setup looks a little sketchy, but it works. I've just got a 1, 2, 3 block with some brass on each side to protect the frame from the clamping. I've got the same saw I used to cut the frame, and I'm going to ease in there and cut it. Now, like I said, you can do this with a Dremel or the tool that I showed you in the first video in this series that I made. You can do all of that operation here. You don't have to have a mill. I mean, none of this stuff is easy, but anybody can do it.
If it was easy, everybody'd be doing it.
Well, yeah, but you don't have to be so harsh about it. Besides, I thought you said that if you had a mill, you could do it.
I did.
Right. Anyway, you don't have to have a mill to do this. I know I'll keep harping on that, but having the mill makes it much easier and a lot more accurate. You can do it with a drill press or some modified tools like I've shown. So we're going to get this cut, and then we'll go on to doing our detent. Okay, now it's time to drill our detent. Now you want to make sure you've got your blades all finished to the final finish, at least on your flats and the insides of your frames, because you won't be able to do any sanding here once you install your detent. Now, if you don't know, the detent is what allows the blade to flip open. It gives a little holding power, and it also assists in holding it into the frame. See how it just drops in there? Matter of fact, I've already put the detent in this one, except the spring is not bent yet. So I'm just going to hold the spring right here. And you can see, I'm going to be using 1/16 balls. You can use ceramic or hardened steel balls. These are hardened steel 440C balls. I'll be drilling through the lock bar with a number 54 bit and all the way into the blade and leaving a dimple on the blade. Then I will take the blade and I will take a 54, a 53, which is larger, and slightly touch that dimple in the blade. That'll give a little more snapping power. So just a reminder that these 53 and 54, your 53 is larger than your 54. Then I will drill back through the bar by itself to open that hole up to take the 1/16 ball with the 53 drill. I'll show you the tools that I'm going to be using to set this, and I'll explain it when I get there. But right now I want to assemble it, and I'm going to close it down, and I'm going to put a little clamp on it to hold some pressure on the blade. You can use tape and rubber bands and all that, whatever you want to use. I use a little clamp to put a little pressure to hold the blade in to drill down into the blade, because there's a little spring in there and I want it to be shut tight when that detent is in the blade. All right, the first thing I need to do is scribe some marks here to center punch where we're going to drill the detent. Now I use around 40 to 50 thousandths from each edge, and this particular model, my detent is way up here. Now you want to make sure when you're designing this that your detent don't ever fall into this track. Mine's going to be right on the edge of this track, and it'll come right in between the edge of the ricasso and that track. And by the way, all of the drills, tools, and stuff that I'm using and that I can find, they're linked in the description as affiliate links. And if you're looking for those and want to get them, it'd be awesome if you use those affiliate links. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. All right, a while ago, I realized that my audio wasn't working right. But what I was saying is you want to hold this bar down when you're drilling through, because if it flexes, you'll break your bit and you'll have other issues. You'll have to soak it in acid to get it out. So right now, I'm going to drill through with the larger bit that'll fit the 1/16 ball. Now, keep in mind, it's going to make a burr on the inside. You can put this on your lap plate and clean it, but do not deburr that hole. Leave the burr in the hole. That helps hold the ball. So now I'm just going to lightly chamfer that detent hole. Don't want to go too far, just lightly. And that's it, just a light chamfer, and that'll help this blade detent work better. It'll snap better, just performs better. All right, before I put the detent ball in, I wedge the lock bar over, and I like to come right here on this edge and file a slight chamfer there. It gets rid of a burr there, but it also helps ease that lock bar when it snaps in place. Then I will sand it here where there's another burr. I also, before I put the detent ball in, is I harden the face. Most people use a carbidizer machine to do that and lay down a thin layer of carbides on there. I am going to use heat. I use heat hardening to do this. I learned this from an Australian knife maker who's no longer with us now, who made the most beautiful frame locks I ever seen. Sad story. I won't go into there on what happened to him, but he lost his life in the knife shop. I'll be hard facing with heat, and that works great. I don't ever have issues with sticky lock, and it holds up just fine. I've made a bunch of them and never had any issues. So I'm gonna come here with a file and just catch that corner and lightly chamfer it. This is just a piece of brass, protects the scale, but there's a slight chamfer there. Then I'll just sand this burr off with a piece of sandpaper. All right, time to go harden it. So what this is going to do is lay down a layer of titanium oxide on the face of that lock bar. But what I want to do is heat it up. You don't want to melt anything. Just heating that face up till it heats through and through on that face. And I get it up to a pretty bright color. You can see there it's pretty bright. I don't know how it is on camera, but then I just let it cool. That's all it is to it. So I'm set up here on an arbor press. I've got my detent ball sitting in the hole, and I've got a feeler gauge here that's a 25 thousandths feeler gauge. I find that works pretty good. And then I've got a hardened piece of steel. This is just a piece of 15N20. I'm going to set this on top of there, give it a press, and check to see if it's in there good. If not, we'll press it again. Remember, do not chamfer that hole. Make sure you're putting the ball bearing on the right side of your scale. And that's usually all it takes. The ball's in there pretty good. All right, let's see how the detent works. Now I haven't bent the lock bar, but I can hold pressure on it to see how it performs. Pretty nicely. That's what we want. Nice. So now the next thing I want to do is contour the frame before we bend the lock bar. Once we bend it, can't do that. So I'm going to set up to do that. Then we'll get on to bending the lock bar and cutting our lock face on the blade. But I'm afraid we're out of time. On the next video, we're going to cut the lock face after everything's profiled and get ready to start assembly, I've got to grind the blades and all that. We still got a good bit of stuff left to do, some tuning, that sort of thing, some other tips and tricks. But if you got any comments or questions, just leave them down below. I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. I want to thank my patrons. I want to thank you for watching.